Hi, everybody. You're listening to Comics and History, episode number 114, part 3, a tribute to Chris Ives from Kid to Flash podcast, with a look at Waid and LaRock's The Return of Barry Allen concluded. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session as we wrap up this tribute to my friend Chris Ives from Kid to Flash podcast. I'm just about finished my wrap-up of the Return of Barry Allen storyline, written by Mark Waid and penciled by Greg LaRocque in 1993. So let's get back into it before we look at the legacy of this all-important story arc. In the epilogue to Flash number 79, we see Wally and Linda together heading to the Flash Museum. Linda has a surprise for Wally. Another Flash statue has been erected next to that of the Barry Allen Flash. Wally in his Flash costume. Now, as for that memoir, we learned that it was written in 1997 by Iris West Allen, signaling her return in the next 4 years, both in comic book time and in real world time. The really neat thing about this is that in 1997, Mark Waid wrote the life story of the Flash, and it was originally produced as a hardcover, and it was really neat because the cover made it look like the author of this book was Iris West Allen, and Mark Waid's name, as well as the names of the other members of the creative team, were included in smaller print on the cover. It's a real treasure trove of pre-crisis Barry Allen information for those who were not so familiar with Barry Allen's history as the Flash. This memoir also served to show that the great majority of Barry's pre-crisis history was transferred over into the post-crisis era. I could do a whole separate episode on the life story of Barry Allen. It's just really neat how in Flash number 79 we see the copyright date 1997, and in real world time the book was written in 1997. Now, given Mark Waid's stature within the comics community, I'm sure that in 1993 he could very well have been planning to write the life story of the Flash somewhere in the future, and editorial said to him, okay, well, you know what, you can be on the Flash title as long as you want. So if this is something you want to wait for to write and release in 4 years' time, go ahead. Or maybe it was just happy coincidence. In any event, what was really neat about this memoir is that it did provide some hints as to future Flash events, some of which played out in part, but certain things that Iris mentioned in the memoir didn't come to be. Maybe that's because of the direction that Mr. Waid was taking the characters during his remaining years on the Flash book. Maybe it's because Jeff Johns and other writers said, okay, we can't really fit that in. Maybe it was Mr. Waid saying, okay, well, I'm going to plant some things which just aren't going to turn out to be true, just to give a hint for readers of what could come, but what ultimately will not come to pass. What was really neat about this was in 1993, nobody expected Iris West to come back. I'm thinking in the continuity at the time, I don't think Wally himself was even aware that his aunt was somebody who originally came from the 30th century and was simply sent back in time by her parents, and that following her death, the time paradox caused by her death resulted in her spirit being returned to her native time period, where it was joined with a cloned body. So this was another nice bit of news for Wally after all of the challenges he'd gone through during the first part of his career as the Flash, taking on his uncle's greatest nemesis, and now realizing that at some point his beloved aunt would return. And indeed, she would return at the time of 0 Hour. She came back with her grandson, Bart Allen, whose metabolism was wildly out of control and was aging at an accelerated rate due to his inheriting speed-based powers. And so Wally was able to stabilize Bart. He would become Impulse. Of course, later he'd become Kid Flash, and for a short time, The Flash. But the nice thing for readers was that Iris decided to stay in the present day, and so she became another valuable member of the Flash's supporting cast. And life story of the Flash is available on Comixology, and I encourage anybody who has an interest in this title or learning more about the Flash in general, Wally West specifically, go online and purchase a digital copy. It's a really fun read. Okay, now, looking at the legacy of the return of Barry Allen, we saw some immediate aftermath in Flash number 80, in which the principal artist coming in was Mike Wieringo, who would come in to have a celebrated run, no pun intended, on the title. And for a number of Flash readers, they identify Mike Wieringo as their Flash artist. And in the initial pages of Flash number 80, we see Wally racing through the streets of Keystone, now at the speed of light. He's happy, he's confident, the fear and self-doubt that he has experienced for years are now a thing of the past. And I can just hear the current Flash TV theme playing in the background, with Michael Rosenbaum, who portrayed Wally West in the JLU series, speaking these words. My name is Wally West, and I am the fastest man alive. When I was a boy, a freak accident gave me the same powers as my hero, Barry Allen, Central City's Scarlet Speedster. Years ago, my uncle gave his life to save the Earth when it was faced with a crisis, and I took his costume and title to keep his memory alive. It was hard, and for a long time I struggled to live up to his name. Recently, I defeated Barry's greatest enemy, Eobard Thawne. In doing so, I realized that I have the duty to build on my uncle's legacy, and that his mantle is now my own. I'm no longer a kid, I am the Flash. This is the Wally West who would go on to seemingly sacrifice his life during 0 Hour. He would return and discover the existence of the Speed Force, which he could now access to gain even greater power and become the fastest of all the Flashes. This is the Wally West who would become a mentor to his cousin Bart Allen during Bart's time as both Impulse and Kid Flash. This is the Wally West who would become a founding member of the Grant Morrison era JLA, and would become close friends with Kyle Rayner, keeping the tradition of a Flash GL partnership in the next era. And of course, this is the Wally West who would go on to marry Linda Park and become the father of 2. it's funny, this story arc is all about the concept of legacy, and it's just amazing given that this storyline itself created a huge legacy for Wally West and the concept of the Flash in general. This is an indescribably important story arc in the history of Wally West's time as the Flash. For me, it's the best turning point story arc that I have ever read. And I think of other characters and how they've evolved over time. But when you look at other characters, there aren't really specific storylines you can point to and say, okay, that's the moment where the character changed in a fundamental way and was forever transformed going forward. You can certainly look at entire runs by particular writers, creative teams, but those are runs consisting of a series of storylines. I just think, where would Wally West be without the return of Barry Allen story by Waid and LaRocque? I think certainly Waid was taking him on the path to becoming a much more confident and mature hero, but I think the journey probably would have taken several more years, and certainly there would have been different events which would have resulted in Wally's continued maturation. But I think it's just so brilliant that Waid used the return of Barry's greatest enemy to bring about this turning point in Wally's career. And I know we had the Flash Rebirth storyline by Jeff Johns and Ethan Van Sciver following Final Crisis, and then of course there's been the whole Rebirth period where all of the solo titles had the Rebirth subtitle attached to them. But really, I think you can see the return of Barry Allen's story by Waid and LaRocque as the original Flash Rebirth story. And it's so great to see the original Wally West back in the Rebirth era. He may be de-aged and he may have lost some of his memories, but in terms of his personality and his approach to being a hero, this is the Wally West who experienced and was shaped by the events of the return of Barry Allen. So folks, there you have it. There's my look at Waid and LaRocque's return of Barry Allen. And to my friend Chris Ivy, I raise a proverbial glass in toast to you and to your wonderful From Kid to Flash podcast. Folks, for those of you who have not had the pleasure of listening to From Kid to Flash, please check back at the Comics and History Facebook page for a link to From Kid to Flash. Really, really wonderful podcast. All right, folks, to wrap up, in our next episode, episode number 115, we'll conclude our Cole's Notes series on DC's Legends. And what do you know? I'll be talking about Wally West some more as I look at the sixth and final issue of yet another seminal DC story. If you want to get in contact with me, you can reach me through email at comicsandhistory@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can go to the Comics and History Facebook page, like the page so that you get regular updates on upcoming shows. All right, folks, episode number 115 will drop in 2 weeks' time. So until those 14 days have come and gone, this class is dismissed.